Hey everyone! This is a short tutorial about how to use the Crystal Kit. First of all, you download the Blender zip, then you unpack it, and please make sure that everything inside of the folder stays inside of the folder. Don't, for example, move the textures around because then the blend file won't find the textures anymore. Okay, let's open up a fresh blend file here. Please mind that the Crystal Kit is downwards compatible to Blender 3.5. So using 3.6, like I'm doing here now, is fine. While you of course could just use the blend file in the folder you just unpacked to work in there, I guess the normal workflow is that you will import the crystals into one of your scenes. There are two good ways to do this, and I will show them both to you. The first way to import the Crystal Kit is with the asset browser. For this, please open up a new Blender Preferences window, and then you head to File Paths. Down in the asset libraries, you have to add a new path pointing to the folder you just unpacked. So for me, it's Desktop, Crystal Kit Tutorial, and that's it. You just add the folder. You don't have to specify any other file. And now, once we save this and open up a new window with the asset browser, you see you have the Crystal Kit available over here. You see everything is at your disposal, and all the stuff over here is for manual workflow. So for example, if you wanted to scatter a garnet just by hand. But we will talk about the Crystal Kit now. So just use the AK Crystal Kit and drag it to your scene. And now please mind that you have to uncheck instance here, because if you don't uncheck it, everything will be an instance and you can't edit anything. So uncheck this and you're fine. And that's it. If we hit render here, then you see we got crystals and everything is working as it should be. The second way to import the Crystal Kit is just as easy. It's what I prefer, in fact, because I don't like the asset browser so much. We had to File and Append. Append, by the way, is Blender's way of copying stuff around between blend files. It's a really handy feature. You go to the folder you just unpacked, you select the Crystal Kit blend file, and now you double click it. And after that you can see all the data types included in the blend file, and we can just pick something we want to move to our scene. We head to Collection, and please append the AK Crystal Kit geonodes, not the manual use one, the one with geonodes. Hit append, and that's it. Everything's here. And again, if we hit render, you see we got crystals growing. Here we are in the Crystal Kit blend file we just unpacked. And by the way, feel free to work directly in this file. Also have a look at all the examples I provided. It might be interesting for you. Let's talk about rendering for a second. Let's just, for the sake of it, set cycles render back to default. And first thing you see that under the render settings, light pairs and light max bounces, you see that the volume rays are set to 0. In case of the little quartz here, part of the shader is volume rendering. So if you are using the Crystal Kit in a fresh blend file with cycle standard settings, please make double sure that you set the volume rays to at least 3. And if I do this, you can see immediately everything will get this nice milky look of light being scattered inside of the crystals. To achieve a really nice look, for me, I think 6 is a good amount of rays, but 3 is already telling the effect, and it's rendering quite quick. Next thing in line is the transmission rays. If I set them to 0, you can see there is no light coming through the crystals anymore at all. Yeah, that's also really incorrect. And it slowly starts to be better as I increase the number of rays. Now, if you have a shot where the light has to travel through really many crystals in a row, then I recommend you cranking up the transmission rates to something that is, yeah, at least above 6. Those two values are really important, transmission and volume. Also, what's really important is that you have a nice lighting in your scene. I recommend you to have at least a nice HDR for the general world lighting. So for example, you can just use the one I included in textures, the N4K HDR. Aside from the rays and from the lighting, please note that crystal materials are a bit complex and they of course have a longer render time. So for example, if you can get away with a still, I highly recommend you using the denoise feature of Blender. The denoising for animations might not work so well if you don't have enough samples. However, for stills, the denoise feature is absolutely amazing. Just use it. And the samples you just use the usual way, just increase them if you want to get a more clean image. Okay, that's it for rendering. Let's head back to the crystal kit. I just created a little Suzanne here as demonstration object. And as we just said, we go to Append, we go to the crystal kit geonodes and we hit Append. Now this is what you end up with, everything in one place. You don't even have to keep this one visible, and on the view layer you can just turn it off, and now everything is nicely hidden away. And now you can start using the crystal kit in your scene. So let's say this is one of your objects that you want to have populated with crystals. You just go to the modifier tab, you go to geometry nodes, and now you add a new crystal kit geonodes. And that's it. You got crystals all over the place. You can see that Suzanne in here is not much larger than a meter, and that's because I scaled her down. But for the crystal kit to work properly, we want to have everything at scale 1. And also we want to make sure that the rotation is zeroed out. This is because everything is object coordinate based, which has the advantage that you can animate the crystals. You can scale them, you can rotate them, everything will stick to the objects, which is important for dressing. But for now, please make sure that if you have a freshly created object, you want to go to Object, Apply, and apply rotation and scale in order to make everything behave properly. Yeah, let's head over to the properties themselves. By the way, everything is named. You can just hover it and it will give you some information what the value is doing. But let's go through it together from top to bottom. First, density. This is the amount of crystals. If you crank this down, you get less crystals. If you crank it up, you get more crystals. It's as easy. Z contrast, in the standard setting, it focuses upward growing crystals, but if you move it down to 0, crystals can basically grow everywhere, as you can see here. Let's keep this 2.2 for the moment. Okay, patchiness. The patchiness is basically how much the crystals are forming little islands. Let's increase this for the moment and turn on the patch size. And this is basically determining how big the islands itself are. Yeah? If you turn this down, you get really small islands. If you turn it up, you get big ones. If you use the patches shift, you can basically just shift around these islands. For example, if you really love the island of crystals over here, but you want to see it over there in the rendering, then you can just grab the y-axis and shift it over here. Then we got the seed property. This is basically a random result per number you give. So for example, if you like the result that 6 is calculating for you, you can always choose to go back to 6 and it will be the same result. Then we got primary enable. This is basically the visibility of the primary crystal layer. For better showing what it does, I will switch to attributes. And inside of the primary layer, you are free to switch the crystal type. For example, now I'm scattering these big tourmaline kind of crystals. Now it would be calcite stuff, or pyrites, or garnets, or you can have spherical crystals, or you can have the base crystals, which are a bit amorphous and also a bit chaotic. Then you can switch the material type. You are absolutely free in what type of material you want to render on which type of mesh. So for example, on the quartz type mesh, I would render now a calcite material. Now I would render a pyrite material. Now I would render a garnet material, some black tourmaline or hematite one, and the base material. The way it's meant to be is that you synchronize the values. So for example, now you would have a garnet type of mesh together with the garnet material. We got the height of the crystal. It makes more sense if I switch back to the quartz type. So now I can have a quartz that is basically a little bit higher. And the same way you can adjust the broadness. You can also set a random rotation. Then we got the secondary enable, and this is basically enabling a secondary layer of crystals. So for example, as you can see, these crystals are now spawning secondary crystals of crystal type 1. So you would have quartz on garnet. And you can, as in the primary layer, also specify the type and the type of material. You have a density for the spawn rate on the crystals, and you have a density value for the spawn rate on the ground. So by this you can also have some of your nice secondary crystals on the floor or on the emitter mesh, basically. Then, as in the primary layer, you got a height, you got a width, and you also got a rotate. If I switch this to this type, you can see all of the secondary crystals are moving around. Then we got the base attribute. This is basically the little crystals that form around the feet of the primary crystals. I recommend you cranking up the base density a little bit. It will just look better, but of course it will take a bit longer to render. You can adjust the scale of the base, and you can also rotate it if you want that, and of course you can switch the material. However, the 7, as I said, is a type of amorphous quartz, and this is looking quite good for most of the crystals. So now we distributed the crystals, but how to control them? There are a few ways with this. For example, you can use the brush curves. If you enable this one, then everything might disappear. If it does, just hit invert and everything will be back again. You go to the geonodes. If you have hidden it, you just unhide it. You go to the paint and erase curve, and now you can enter it. So you are in the edit mode. You go to the draw tool and make sure that the tool settings are activated, and now you can choose surface, and you can start actively selecting which part of the crystals you want to see and which one you don't. And you also can then go back into the geonodes, and you can invert it back again. So for example, now I would basically use this thing as an eraser. And for example, if Suzanne shouldn't have crystals on her ear, then you can just paint it out. This, by the way, also has an attribute that lets you control the distance from the curve. So yeah, you can dial it in and out and until you like the effect. And now we got a property that I built in as a test, but then decided to leave it just because it's so much fun. You got the auto animation. If I enable this, you will see everything disappears. But if you start playing the timeline, you will see the crystals are growing automatically. So for those of you who want to do some easy motion graphics, that's the way to do it. You can increase the animation speed. Setting this to 2 will be approximately double the speed. If you have an animation that has 1000 frames, then you can also use the time offset value to place this block to an area in your animation where you want the crystals to grow. That's the auto animation, and you also got the manual animation mode. If I activate this, you see the crystals will appear only in this lower part here. And why is that? The reason for this is that there is a manual animation collection, and everything you put in this collection can be used for animating. Right now it's this little example box here, and you see if I shift this around, then in the wake of it the crystals will grow. Yeah, this is something that might come in handy if you want to have some more control. So for example, if I want to do an animation where the crystals grow from the left and from the right simultaneously, I can just duplicate this one, and then I'll set 2 location keys here, and I will set another location key here. And if we play back the animation, you see the crystal is growing. Yeah, and of course you can scale these objects and deform them, and yeah, do whatever you want to do with them. You also have a proximity value here. This is also, each of these properties of course is animatable, so you can also choose, for example, to use the manual animation here together with the primary rotate to get a nice effect. And now for the last part, and that's the material editing or color correction of the shaders themselves. What about having blue garnets? For this, as you can see, the garnets are the primary crystals. We go down and have a look at the color correction, primary hue, saturation and value. If we change this attribute, turn the hue, you see we are shifting it to yellow, over to green, and if we turn further, then it will turn at some point blue. And voila, we got ourselves some blue garnets. But how can we make them a little bit more attractive? Because right now they are quite dark. Well, for one, we could up the saturation a bit. So if we do this, they will get more saturated. We also have to turn up the value a bit. You can see immediately more light is coming through. Yeah, let's increase this even more. And now we have to turn down the saturation again. And here you can see we got some bluish crystal stuff. Then we got for the primary crystals something specific, and have a look. If I increase the roughness, then everything is getting rougher. And regarding the normal intensity, it's the second value here. You see, as I crank this up, the structure is getting more and more accentuated. Same goes for the second crystal layer. You can also change the hue, the saturation and the value for this one, and you can do the same for the base crystals. Next thing in line is the volume properties. First of all, we can disable the volume shading altogether. This just switches the whole thing off. Switch it back on, and let's go through the values. First of all, we got, again, hue, saturation and value. To make this more obvious, let's set the saturation to 2. And here you can see it's getting quite visible now. For example, if you wanted to do an amethyst or something like this, then you could do it with these volume options. Then we got the volume density. This is set to a standard value of 1, and for example, if we increase it to 10, you can see the volume is getting more dense, so the light is not going through so easily. And then we got the volume offset, and if you watch closely, you see there is a gradient, a volume gradient in the crystals, and I can dial this up the crystal and down the crystal. If I dial it up all the way through the top, you can see only the tips of the crystals are now getting this volume. And the last two attributes we have in the properties are two utility attributes. The first one, detailed subdivisions, increases the subdivisions of the emitter mesh, the mesh where the geonodes are placed on. This is to have more accurate noises. Imagine you have a really low poly acid, something that has only few very big polygons. You have to up the detailed subdivisions a bit in order to make something like the patchiness work. And last thing is utility hide emitter geo. This basically just hides the geometry that spawns the crystals. You can use this for many different things. For example, if you want to do set dressing, you can just use multiple meshes, spawn different geometry crystal groups on them, and then you just switch off the geometry. And by this you can have basically everything you want as a ground plane or as whatever rocks, but still got tweakable objects that spawn the crystals. And it's independent from each other. That's it for the crystal kit. I hope you can use all the properties, and I really hope you enjoy the node group. Have fun!